Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I'm Cody and today is a follow-up to the Turkish elections, and this isn't going to be a slideshow because we're heading for a runoff, so you'll probably get a more formalized slideshow after that. But there are a couple things I wanted to point out that I found interesting that if you're interested in this topic, you might find interesting as well. So I want to start here with this gentleman's Twitter. Great resource for live election information, a very good coverage kind of across the board on just about everything, and also like balanced, so that is usually really helpful. But yeah, great resource. I know I'm going to butcher his name, so just find this guy if you're interested. But one thing I wanted to point out, and we'll take a look at the article here in a second, is this post he made here. So he points out that Erdoğan is in a really good position heading in to the runoffs, basically. And there are a couple big reasons why. He was already very close. He's half a point away. So he's 49 point, I think it's like 46% of the vote. So he has much less ground to make up than Kılıçdaroğlu, who's like 45, 46, 47, somewhere in there. But he's doing much better in that regard. Added on top of that, Erdoğan's nationalist votes are likely going to break his way because their viewpoint is much closer to that of the AKP and Erdoğan. Now, obviously, it's not the exact same because they would have just voted for Erdoğan, but it's much closer than that of what the Table of Six and Kılıçdaroğlu has going for him. So most likely that's going to make up that half point he needs. And regardless, even if he does lose, from my understanding, I haven't seen official final numbers on this yet, so we'll see. The majority of the parliament is still in his coalition's favor. So not purely just the AKP, but the AKP and their affiliated parties still have the majority in parliament. So even if Kılıçdaroğlu does end up making it to the presidency, there's very few things in that first 100 days and that list of projects that him, the CHP, and the Table of Six wanted to get done that can get done without that help. Now, if we click into the article that was in that tweet, this is a comparison, interestingly enough, of Erdoğan's performance in the stronger AKP regions. And we see the gray bar there is 2018. The 2023 bar is in kind of the reddish color, reddish peach color, I guess. But as we see, he's actually underperforming in every single one of these regions. That's a little odd. Now, of course, they're all well over majorities, so it's not like he's, not able to even pull his own base out. But a lot of this, since it is pretty minor overall, it is underperformance, but a lot of that's probably counted from a little bit of bleed off into the Table of Six, because I think one of their parties was kind of designed for this exact circumstance, and then Erdoğan. So you do have some underperformance here, with at least Erdoğan being kicked out in the second round just because he didn't get enough of the vote, I believe. You'll be seeing these numbers probably match up much closer than they are now. So last thing I want to cover here is a comparison to 2018. So this is the first round in 2018, and you see most of the central parts of the country are breaking Erdoğan at this point. Once again, he's back in 2018. This is just the first round, though. Because they never got to a second round because Erdoğan got over 50% of the vote. This changes very significantly. Now, you'll see some of this will still kind of break CHP, but all of this, primarily around these regions, and all of this purple over here are going to change, which is very interesting. So just keep in mind how much yellow is here. Now, if we look at the first round off of the finalized numbers that we have for the presidential race here in 2023, you see the coastal regions break for Kılıçdaroğlu. You see Ankara and its neighboring province, or the neighboring province to the capital, also break Kılıçdaroğlu. You have his home territory here, and then you have this entire side of the country. In all of this, even with most of the population centers, only 45%. This is something that gets talked about a lot with US politics as well, usually to a lesser degree, but it is really interesting that with only 3 major population centers versus the 4 that kind of broke for Kılıçdaroğlu, Erdoğan still has a 4-point lead, right? These are not necessarily like 100% rural areas by any means, but they're also not major metropolitan areas. So you have a more dispersed populace than, say, you do here in the US, but it is an interesting fact to see how, the CHP was kind of just relegated to this region last time. And now it's kind of breaking into the central parts of the country a little bit, down along the southern coastline, down into the region that was affected by those earthquakes a while back, but not entirely. You would kind of think with all the criticisms that Erdoğan's government had received in his response that some of these areas also would have maybe turned, but apparently not. And then you have a more solidified eastern border region here. And it's still not quite enough. Now, of course, we don't 100% know how the runoff is going to turn out, so this could change, obviously. This is just the first round, and I do think it is really interesting that Erdoğan was almost there still. But at least here in the US, while typically runoffs usually favor the more conservative parties, the last couple of runoffs and special elections have started to favor more liberal candidates. Now, once again, not across the board, and Turkey's very, very different, but even with this 4-point deficit and Erdoğan being kind of more aligned with Erdoğan, or at least closer to it, we could see some solidifying in some of these more kind of pale regions. But it's hard to say. Who knows? I will, like I said, do a more formalized follow-up, and maybe I'll do like a short with the more immediate results, but this is what we have so far. So if you have any questions, I'll do my absolute best to answer them, or at least try to point you in the right direction of some resources. But yeah, thanks for sticking with me, and look forward to a more elaborate video in the future.